In February 1989, a man with the name Alec Newald was abducted by aliens and taken for 10 days to their home world.
Someone has come across the one piece of evidence that I've always said we need in order to prove the ancient astronaut theory.
Imagine leaving home for a simple 3-hour drive, only to return 10 days later with no memory of where you've been. That's exactly what happened to Alec Newald. His shocking claim? He was abducted by aliens, lived among them for over a week, and returned with proof so unsettling that authorities tried to silence him. What did Alec really see? Were his memories authentic or planted? And why did intelligence agencies suddenly take such a keen interest in him? Today, we'll unravel his story, his so-called evidence, and the extraordinary secrets he revealed. The day Alec vanished. On February 1989, Alec Newald left his hometown of Rotorua, New Zealand, intending to make a simple drive north to Auckland. It was a trip he had made many times before, a journey of about 3 hours by car. He carried no luggage, no grand plan, just the expectation of arriving at his destination the same afternoon. But when Alec finally returned, it wasn't hours later. It was 10 days later. And in those 10 days, he had no memory of what had happened to him, nor any explanation for why he was allegedly missing. Imagine the shock of his family and friends who had reported him missing after his failure to arrive. The police had been drawn into the mystery, launching a search for his car and any trace of his whereabouts. To them, this wasn't a man who had wandered off voluntarily. This was a disappearance that defied reason. When Alec finally appeared again, he was greeted not with relief alone, but with a mixture of disbelief, suspicion, and overwhelming curiosity. To those who knew him, the man who returned seemed the same, and yet not quite the same. Neighbors and relatives were stunned. "Where have you been?" they asked him. The police wanted answers as well. Alec himself was confused by the intensity of the response. To him, the trip had been continuous. He had gotten into his car, begun the drive, and then, in what felt like no more than a blink, found himself again in Auckland. It wasn't until he looked around, saw the crowd that had gathered, and heard the voices of people saying he had been gone for 10 full days, that the enormity of the situation struck him. The physical toll was evident. Alec complained of terrible headaches that wouldn't subside, a persistent tiredness that made even simple tasks difficult, and a strange inability to focus. These weren't the signs of a man who had simply hidden away for a few days. It was as though his body had endured an ordeal beyond his comprehension, even if his conscious mind could not recall it. At first, Alec could offer no explanation. He had no story to give the police, no timeline to reconstruct, and that only deepened the mystery. His alleged missing car was another question mark. Some said it was never accounted for in the official record. Others claimed it was found, though Alec himself could not clearly recall what had happened to it. What he did know was that his reality had fractured. Time for him had passed in the blink of an eye, while for everyone else, he had been gone 10 days. The local community buzzed with speculation. Some whispered that he had suffered a mental breakdown. Others believed foul play might be involved. Still others pointed to the uncanny strangeness of his reappearance as proof of something beyond explanation. In the late 1980s, New Zealand was not accustomed to UFO lore and abduction stories in the mainstream. Alec's situation seemed like the stuff of science fiction, yet here he was, a flesh and blood man standing in front of them, unable to explain where he had been. Then the fragments began to surface. Not immediately, but slowly, like memories leaking back into consciousness after a dream. At first, mere flashes, disjointed images, sensations of lightness, weightlessness, and otherworldly presence. Alec learned to fight them again, contending with the reality that these were nothing but hallucinations emitted by his mind. Slowly but steadily, they formed an edifice of narrative. Those about him saw a withdrawn young man who was quietly wrestling with an unexpressed bond that had begun manifesting way before. The headaches continued, as did the fatigue. It appeared to be caught in a state of resigning itself to being viewed by the world, while there was an inner world buried deep inside his mind, and into that inner world. Only he knew something had happened with profound meaning between those 10 lost days. But he was not going to let that happen. He had to let those memories, how the actual beginning would emerge, continue pressing against the frontiers of his awareness. But as the pieces of his memory returned, what Alec described would shock not just his family, but the entire world. The alien encounter begins. For days after his strange return, Alec Newald lived in a fog. The headaches persisted, his energy drained, and fragments of strange images kept rising in his mind. He tried to dismiss them at first, illusions caused by stress, or perhaps dreams that lingered too long, but they didn't fade. Instead, they sharpened until he could no longer deny that something extraordinary had happened in those allegedly missing 10 days. The first memory Alec could put into words was not of roads, cities, or even the earth at all. It was of losing his body. He described it as if his physical form had been stripped away, sifted like sand through an unseen filter, leaving only his essence behind. One moment, he was in his car. The next, his body was gone, and he drifted in a vast, boundless space. He wasn't standing, walking, or sitting. He was simply there, floating, detached, yet fully conscious. It felt like a near-death experience, or what some might call the separation of soul and flesh. He remembered looking around, though looking didn't quite describe it. He had no eyes, no physical senses, but somehow he could perceive his surroundings. The environment was immense, stretching out without walls or boundaries. A faint glow illuminated the space, soft and otherworldly, yet without any clear source. In the far distance, vague shapes began to take form, shadows at first, then distinct figures approaching. At first, Alec thought they might be spirits. Their movements were slow, graceful, almost weightless. But as they drew closer, their features came into focus, and the idea of them being human ghosts quickly dissolved. These beings were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were thin and of average human height, but their proportions were different. Their heads were larger, their eyes narrow yet deeply set, and their faces broad and smooth. There was something unsettling about them, but also something strangely familiar. Alec would later describe the moment with a mixture of awe and disbelief. These were not apparitions, not tricks of the mind. They were alive, intelligent, and watching him closely. Yet, instead of speaking with mouths or making sounds, they communicated directly into his thoughts. A voice appeared in his head, clear, calm, and deliberate. "Welcome," one of them said, though its lips did not move. "I am the designated guardian of this section. Anything you need to make your stay with us more pleasant, ask, and I shall do my best to provide." The words startled Alec. He realized then that this was not a dream. These beings were aware of him, speaking to him in a way that bypassed all language barriers. It was pure thought, flowing seamlessly between their minds. Strangely, it didn't feel invasive. Instead, it felt as though his brain had been gently tuned to their frequency. They said the unusual suit Alec now wore, to him a bright, glowing garment that had seemingly appeared on him without his putting it on. It was supposed to help him relay communications with them. It would give him understanding of their thoughts and the power to project back to them his own thoughts with clarity. Despite his confusion, Alec understood what this meant. This was technology, or might be biology, so advanced that it blurred the distinction between clothing and communication. Alec could sense no antagonism from the beings, although fear coursed through him. They radiated goodwill, even curiosity. Those who had anticipated Alec's arrival and wanted him to feel comfortable with their presence. One of them pointed out that Alec was free to leave if he wanted. They didn't want to keep him against his will. Yet, they did hope that he would choose to stay, for there was much to tell him. Yet this was only the beginning. What Alec saw next was a city unlike anything on Earth. Inside the alien city, once Alec accepted that he was no longer on Earth, his surroundings began to shift. The endless, glowing void gave way to something more structured, more tangible. Slowly, he became aware of shapes in the distance. Lines, curves, and patterns that looked nothing like the towns or cities he had known back home. What emerged before his eyes was a sprawling metropolis, unlike anything humanity had ever built. The first thing that struck him was the scale. The city seemed to stretch endlessly along a coastline, its boundaries disappearing into the horizon. Even from his vantage point, Alec could see that it was vast, covering an area so immense that the largest human cities seemed like small villages in comparison. Yet what made it truly alien was not its size, but its design. Buildings rose up from the ground in unfamiliar shapes. Many were low, circular structures with smooth surfaces that glowed faintly, as though lit from within. Among them stood occasional pyramid-like constructions, shimmering with what looked like tinted glass or translucent crystal. From their peaks rose spiral towers, twisting upward into the sky like giant antennas. At the top of each, Alec noticed something remarkable. Enormous orbs, like giant light bulbs, glowing softly and radiating a strange energy. These were not decorative spires. They felt functional, pulsing with purpose. Everywhere he looked, he saw symmetry and balance. The streets curved gently, blending seamlessly into the architecture. There were no hard corners, no cluttered rows of concrete or steel. Instead, the entire city seemed to flow, as if designed with both aesthetics and energy in mind. It was clean, almost impossibly so. There was no sign of decay, no smoke, no pollution. Alec felt as though he was standing in a world where technology and environment had been harmonized, not forced against one another. Even more astonishing was the atmosphere of the place. It wasn't just a city of glass and stone. It seemed alive, humming faintly, as though the buildings themselves were in communication with one another. Later, Alec would recall the impression that the architecture was made from materials unknown to Earth, semi-transparent, resilient, and possibly organic in nature. To him, it felt as if the structures were grown, not built. The beings who guided him through this alien city moved calmly, showing no sign that they considered it remarkable. To them, this was simply home. To Alec, it was enough to say that the details were too much. He felt like an infant who had entered a technological paradise, where every structure, every pathway seemed to enjoy a subtle hint of meaning or designated purpose. He was led to what he called his own quarters, a home within this city for his interim stay. The rooms inside were simple and elegantly built, with curves instead of corners, brightened with light rather than luggage. The space seemed to alter itself for his requirements, as though the walls themselves responded to his presence. Not luxury by human appreciation, but one that chilled him with its nonchalant perfection. Yet Alec soon realized that his abduction, or invitation, wasn't for sightseeing. The beings made it clear he had been brought here not just to observe, but to learn. This was a deliberate encounter, one in which knowledge would be passed on to him so he could return with it to Earth. And the knowledge they shared wasn't random. It was about Earth's hidden history, secrets humanity was never meant to know. Earth's hidden history revealed. It was within this alien city that Alec met the being who would change everything for him. She called herself Xena, a female among the group. Though her appearance hardly fit human ideas of gender, her presence was calming, her communication gentle yet precise, as though she had been chosen to guide Alec through truths he was not meant to discover alone. Unlike the others, Xena seemed to understand his doubts and fears, reassuring him with thoughts that flowed into his mind like whispers of clarity. Xena explained that Alec's visit was not random. Humanity itself was the reason he had been brought here. According to her, Earth was a unique world, a jewel in the universe, but its history was not what humans had been taught in schools, nor what religions and science books had agreed upon. Humanity, she said, was a designed species, created, shaped, and guided by beings like her people in cooperation with others who came before. She spoke of Cro-Magnon and Homo sapiens not as random outcomes of natural evolution, but as purposeful creations. Cro-Magnon, she said, was one of the first attempts, a vessel designed to carry a second essence, a spirit that could live and learn within a physical form. It was a step in a long experiment, the blueprint for the humanity that would later emerge. Then came Homo sapiens, refined and adapted. This newer form was capable of not only living, but remembering, accessing knowledge across generations, holding the seeds of a greater destiny. Humanity was never meant to be accidental. It was a carefully guided design. But there was a tragedy in Xena's tale. At some point in Earth's past, a darker force had intervened. This force, she claimed, saw humanity's potential and feared it. Humans were on a path toward enlightenment, developing strong spiritual awareness that could rival even the entities who manipulated the stars. To stop this progress, the dark force interfered with human development, crippling them at a genetic level. According to Xena, humanity's DNA had been altered, weakened, and deliberately suppressed. Powers that should have been awakened, spiritual abilities, heightened consciousness, deeper understanding were sealed away. Humans became fragmented, disconnected from the fullness of who they were meant to be. What remained was only a shadow of the greatness they could have achieved. Listening to her words, Alec couldn't help but connect the story to myths he had grown up hearing. Nearly every religion and culture described a fall from grace, a time when mankind had been stronger, wiser, closer to the divine, before some event caused them to lose their power. Christianity speaks of the fall of man in Eden. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe God's shaping and reshaping humanity. Even myths from Greece, India, and the Americas talk of golden ages, when humans were closer to the gods before a catastrophe or betrayal brought decline. Was Xena describing the same story in different words? To Alec, it seemed possible. The parallels were too strong to dismiss. She claimed that Earth's hidden history was not a series of coincidences, but the result of deliberate intervention, both benevolent and malevolent. Humanity had been uplifted, then brought down, and still carried within them the scars of that ancient conflict. Xena said to Alec that a lot of ancient knowledge had not completely vanished. It had been preserved by certain sects, found in various places across the planet, waiting for the right time when humanity could remember again. Sacred places, pyramids, monuments, these are not just structures, but memory remindings, encoded messages gifted to future generations by the ancients who had walked this earth. The very point was that the awakened humanity awaits, but the dark force is going to delay it for thousands of generations. For Alec, all shocks. He had looked forward to accepting nothing but confusion and fear, albeit he now found that humankind exists as the result of a horrific struggle in a greater cosmic contest. The implications transformed his mind into jelly. If Xena was indeed true, then just about everything that mankind understood about its origins, science, religion, and history was incomplete at best, and deliberately misleading at worst. But Alec's revelations didn't just challenge history. They threatened powerful people here on Earth. Governments and shadows, closing in. When Alec finally began to speak openly about fragments of his experience, he expected disbelief. What he didn't expect was the sudden and unnerving attention of authorities. At first, it was subtle, cars idling at the end of his street that he didn't recognize, unfamiliar faces showing up at places he frequented, and the constant sense of being watched. At night, he felt the pressure of eyes on him, though no one was there. It wasn't just paranoia. He was being followed. The more he tried to return to a normal life, the harder it became. Even small things felt manipulated. Phone calls dropped in the middle of conversations. Letters went missing. Strangers approached him with seemingly harmless questions about his past. Alec quickly realized these weren't coincidences. His story had drawn interest, but not from UFO enthusiasts or journalists. It was intelligence agencies and government operatives who wanted to know what he had seen and what he was hiding. Then came the trap. Alec had worked in the motor vehicle trade before the stock market crash. And though he no longer ran a dealership, he still bought and sold cars on occasion. Through this business, he was introduced to a man who called himself Jeff Wright. Jeff claimed to have access to imported Japanese vehicles at bargain prices, surplus stock that could be resold for profit. The arrangement seemed harmless. Alec entered into occasional deals, trusting that Jeff was legitimate. But within months, Alec found himself facing criminal charges. 6 cars he had purchased were suddenly flagged as stolen. Police moved quickly, dragging him into court, and the case spiraled far beyond what seemed reasonable for such an offense. The prosecution pressed relentlessly, stretching what should have been a 6-month process into more than 2 years. 20 separate court appearances, assets seized, and growing financial ruin, Alec's entire life was collapsing under the weight of what appeared to be an orchestrated campaign. The more he looked at the details, the clearer the pattern became. Jeff Wright wasn't just a shady businessman, he had been a plant, part of a setup designed to trap Alec in a situation he couldn't escape. With legal pressure bearing down on him, intelligence operatives stepped out of the shadows. They didn't come with threats at first, they came with offers. If Alec cooperated, if he told them everything about his alien encounters, the charges could go away. His life could return to normal. To Alec, the offer confirmed his worst suspicions. If his story had been nonsense, why would powerful institutions go to such lengths to silence him? Why would they stage an elaborate sting just to put him in a position where they could control him? He realized then that what he had been told by Xena, what he had seen in that alien city, was not just a curiosity. It was information worth suppressing. But Alec wasn't ready to yield. Instead of cooperating, he resisted. He pushed back against their offers, calling their bluff, and endured the punishment that came with defiance. He lost money, lost time, and even served part of a prison sentence. Still, he refused to give them what they wanted most: a full account of his experience and the knowledge he claimed to have received. By this point, Alec knew he couldn't keep his story private anymore. Remaining silent only made him a target. Speaking out, on the other hand, might protect him by making his case public. The government and its agencies could lean on him in the shadows, but once the world knew his story, they would have to be far more careful. The harder they pushed him, the more determined Alec became. And that's when he decided to go public. The book that exposed it all. After years of silent pressure, harassment, and intimidation, Alec Newald made the boldest move of his life. He took his story out of the shadows and placed it into the public domain. He wrote a book titled Co-Evolution, an Interplanetary Adventure, where he detailed what had happened during those 10 lost days in 1989. To Alec, publishing wasn't about money or fame. It was about survival. If his story was out in the open, it would be harder for anyone to erase him quietly. The book was unlike anything readers expected. Alec didn't just recount a vague alien encounter or describe lights in the sky. Instead, he painted a vivid, structured account of living among extraterrestrials. He described their architecture, their technology, their telepathic communication, and the philosophy they shared with him. He wrote of Xena, the alien who guided him, and of the knowledge she revealed about Earth's past. It was less a tale of abduction and more a transfer of wisdom, a message he believed humanity needed to hear. What made coevolution stand out was the detail. Alec included sketches of the alien city he claimed to have walked through, circular dwellings, pyramid-like towers capped with spiraled antennae, and massive glowing orbs perched above their buildings. He described the interiors of rooms that seemed alive, walls that shifted to accommodate his needs, and transportation that functioned without visible mechanics. These weren't the inventions of a science fiction writer, he insisted. They were memories of what he had seen with his own eyes. Beyond the drawings, he provided transcripts of dialogues, exchanges with Xena, and others that were precise, philosophical, and unsettling. They spoke of humanity's spiritual design, the manipulation of DNA by a dark force, and the existence of hidden knowledge on Earth guarded by secret groups. These conversations, if real, revealed a worldview far outside Alec's background. He wasn't a trained philosopher or geneticist, yet the concepts in his book delved into deep intersections of biology, spirituality, and cosmology. For believers, this was the proof they had long been waiting for. Alec wasn't just recounting a fleeting sighting or a hazy dream. He was presenting a coherent narrative, complete with illustrations and technical descriptions. UFO communities hailed him as one of the most significant abductees of modern times, someone whose testimony went beyond mystery and into structured revelation. His book spread internationally, picked up by researchers, journalists, and enthusiasts who saw him as a whistleblower from another world. Some people were not convinced. Skeptics labeled it as an imaginative fiction, a science fiction fantasy dressed up as autobiography. They pointed out inconsistencies, wondered about lack of physical evidence, and accused him of exploiting a fringe audience. Some critics claim that all those detailed illustrations and dialogues could easily have been made through pure imagination. To them, Alec is either insane or deliberately misconfigured. Yet no government talked. No agency opened to vocalists discrediting him. No mainstream scientist wasted his time systematically debunking such claims. For Alec, that silence was loud. If he was truly a fraud, why should he ignore everything? Why not expose his story as fiction to dissuade others? Instead, the agencies that had shadowed him before seemed to retreat, watching from a distance as these words circulated through underground networks and UFO circles. In time, coevolution acquired a cult audience. It became the definitive reference point for discussions of alien contact, the conclusive proof, not really, but a sincerity that many found hard to dismiss. He wrote as a man caught in extraordinary circumstances, trying to pass on what he had been given, regardless of the personal cost. But Alec's story wasn't just a wild claim. It fit a larger pattern of contact and suppression. The unanswered question. Decades after Alec Newald first told his story, his legacy remains one of the most polarizing in the world of UFO encounters. To some, he is a visionary whistleblower, a man who risked his reputation, his freedom, and his safety to share truths that humanity wasn't ready to hear. To others, he is simply a skilled storyteller, weaving science fiction into autobiography to capture attention. Between those extremes lies a gray area where belief and doubt collide, and it is in that space that Alec's story continues to thrive. What makes his account so compelling is the level of detail. Unlike many abductee stories that rely on vague impressions or single frightening encounters, Alec presented a narrative filled with structured experiences. Cities, architecture, philosophical discussions, and even technology that seemed plausible within the framework of advanced civilizations. These weren't fleeting flashes of memory. They were, in his words, lived experiences. Supporters argue that such consistency over time spanning interviews, writings, and public talks, points to authenticity rather than fabrication. And yet, the very richness of his story also invites doubt. Skeptics argue that the more detail a witness adds, the easier it becomes to dismiss as invention. To them, Alec's drawings of alien buildings and his transcripts of telepathic conversations feel more like the work of a creative mind than the recollections of an abductee. Psychologists have suggested that stress, hallucinations, or even subconscious borrowing from science fiction culture could explain how such memories formed. Alec himself admitted that for a time he questioned his own sanity, wondering if he had simply imagined the entire ordeal. Still, Alec was far from alone. His testimony echoed patterns found in the accounts of other abductees across the world. Many spoke of being taken not for torture or experiments, but for knowledge. Many described telepathic communication, beings with large heads and narrow eyes, and even warnings about humanity's destructive path. And, just like Alec, they often reported being stalked or harassed after going public. Whether true or not, the parallels are difficult to ignore. They suggest either a shared reality or a shared psychological archetype manifesting across cultures. Whistleblowers in other realms endure similar fates. From corporate insiders to government defectors, those who reveal the inconvenient truth are mostly silenced, not by violence, but by ridicule. By labeling them as mentally disturbed, the authorities can destroy their believability without raising a weapon. Alec himself had experienced it. Bizarre criminal charges, financial mayhem, quiet surveillance, it all follows the playbook of soft suppression. To his supporters, this proved he was telling the truth, while skeptics claimed it was coincidence, a man just being swept through unfortunate happenings. And thus, the story of Alec stands in the middle of belief and disbelief. Was his story that of abduction by beings that rewrote his understanding of life? Or was it a blend of a narrative wholly created by him, intermingling subconscious visions and the mystery of existence? The truth may be never completely known. What is irrefutable is that Alec never backed down from his story. What do you think? Was Alec Newald truly abducted and entrusted with knowledge meant for all humanity? Or was this the work of an imaginative mind weaving myth into reality? His story has left millions questioning the nature of our history, our DNA, and our place in the universe. If you found this deep dive fascinating, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And stick around. Our next video uncovers another hidden story that will make you question everything you thought you knew.